Okay, so good afternoon to everybody. Sorry for a small delay because of technical problems, which we resolved. And we are starting our traditional webinar, so-called solo webinar of United for Ukraine Network. My name is Andrius KUBILIUS. I'm a member of European Parliament from Lithuania. And today we have really very interesting and important conversation in our solo event with Gerald Knaus, who is a chairman of European Stability Initiative, very well-known think tank on very different issues, starting from migration and ending with enlargement and other similar issues. So Gerald has really, for quite a period of time, was proposing different very important ideas on how to bring back enlargement on track, especially with the integration of applicant countries starting from Western Balkans, but also Ukraine, Moldova, and possibly Georgia, first of all, into single market. Those are ideas which we discussed in on different occasions in different formats, and now really, especially when Swedish presidency is coming, we think that this topic, after Ukraine got candidate status, is becoming very important, very crucial, because we expect that negotiations could be started exactly during Swedish presidency, negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, and later on maybe with Georgia. And that is what, as United for Ukraine network of parliamentarian experts, we are looking with a lot of strategic interest. I would add just a few words that last week also European Parliament adopted a special report prepared by the team of rapporteurs, which was led by Tonino Pizzula from Social Democrats. I was also part of that team representing EPP. A special report on new enlargement strategy, where we stated in a very clear way that enlargement is the most important geopolitical policy of EU. It needs to get back on track with ambitions and dynamism. And there are a lot of problems which EU needs to resolve on its own side. It's not only candidates which are not maybe implementing reforms as we would expect, but also on the EU side we have problems. And the ambition of European Parliament is very clear, with integration towards single market and full membership in EU. European Parliament expects that all the accession countries, if they will be able to implement ambitious reform agenda, then all the enlargement should go not for several decades, but should be successfully finished before the end of this decade. So that is how we see the whole process and whole geopolitical agenda of EU. And here I am going to give the floor to Gerald Knaus, but before that, I would like to explain you some logistical issues. All the participants, after initial statement from Gerald Knaus, which can take for 15-20 minutes, all the participants will be able to ask the questions. Put your questions on chat, and I will try to read them out, and Gerald will be able to answer. So now I would give the floor to Gerald Knaus. Gerald, please take the floor.
Thank you, Andrius, and thanks to everyone who's here. Let me see if I can put on my presentation. Freigeben. So, do you see it? Does it work?
Yes, I see.
Fantastic.
Now. Okay.
So let me jump straight in. My name is Gerald Knaus. I'm sitting here in Berlin, which at the moment is a good place to be, because this week the German Bundestag will decide thanks to some very strong advocacy by some of Ukraine's friends to recognize the Holodomor as a genocide, which is a good signal, and it shows that things are possible with the right focus. So let me talk about 2023 and the focus of what might be achieved in the next 6 months. Some of the arguments that might help, and then have a debate on how to make sure that this historic opportunity is used. Now, we all know that the presidencies in theory are no longer as powerful as they used to be, because we have permanent council president, permanent institutions, and yet there are moments in history, and there have been a few in the last decades, when things coincide to make a historic breakthrough possible. Let's hope this is the case in the next 6 months. I remember how it happened in 1999, and I'm sure Andrius and a lot of Baltic leaders will remember the Helsinki summit, when following the end of a war, the war in the Balkans, European leaders were so determined to take a strong decision to make future conflict in Europe less likely that they were ready for a visionary step and start accession talks with a huge number of countries and give candidate status to others. Now, we need a moment like this in response to Ukraine's request for membership, which was in itself a visionary step right at the beginning of the war, when many Europeans were doubting that Ukraine could defend its capital. And as the president of Ukraine has put it a few weeks ago, this winter, these next days will really be decisive, not just for Ukraine, but also for Europe. And at the end of this winter, he put it in a speech a few weeks ago at the Yalta Freedom Forum, we must say in the spring, we are fully ready for negotiations. So like you, I very much hope that, and we know the technical side, will Ukraine meet the 7 conditions, but also importantly, will the Commission be ready to assess the 7 conditions that have been put before Ukraine in time, or will it be a game of delay? But if it is assessed, is that enough? Let's assume that under the Swedish presidency, the decision on starting talks will be taken. Is that enough to make the European dream of Ukraine come true? Now, we all know that there are many issues, and it's about financial support for Ukraine and the campaign to seize the Russian central bank assets, which we're also trying to promote here in Berlin. It is about weapons. As I keep explaining to Germans, this is the way to prevent people having to flee, is giving them a hope that they will be able to defend their country. So weapons are a way to stop mass refugee movements. But it is about refugee reception, because some, or indeed many, might have to flee this winter due to Russia's terror tactics. One word just on the refugee issue, because that's a big one debated in Germany at the moment. Of course, we've all seen the threats coming from the Kremlin about trying to trigger mass displacement, so far without success. But if the infrastructure is destroyed, we already see an extraordinary refugee crisis. The number of refugees in the world, according to UNHCR, increased by 1.4 million in the last 4 years. The number of Ukrainian refugees who've applied for temporary protection just in Poland is 1.5 million. Now, 450,000 in the Czech Republic. In Germany, 1 million, the largest number ever. And in France, however, only 110,000. Why is that interesting? Because if we have another big refugee movement this winter, what we propose is to mobilize European society in a way that has been done in the UK, to create a platform where families around Europe can apply to host Ukrainians if more come during the winter, to receive a thank you payment of 500 euros to cover some of their costs, rising energy prices, and to ensure that states will not be overwhelmed if more people come. As a signal to Putin, we cannot be blackmailed. Why is this important for European integration? Because it will change the emotional balance. The more Europeans know and meet Ukrainians, the easier it will be to convince them that Ukraine needs to be offered a credible perspective as a full member of the EU. But back to enlargement. Financial support, weapons, and refugee reception, all crucial this winter, but so is rethinking the enlargement process. And that is really about rethinking Europe. What is likely to happen is unfortunately still different from what must happen. Now, we have seen in recent years how enlargement turned into a never-ending accession process. Some of you will have seen this from our reports. Croatia was the last member that joined the EU after 68 months of negotiations. This is start and end of negotiations, 5.5 years. Serbia, Montenegro, and of course Turkey negotiating for far longer already. and they are very far from reaching any goal. Montenegro, candidate status since 2010, negotiations for 10 years, 3 chapters closed, no end in sight. Albania, candidate status 2014, no chapter opened. North Macedonia, candidate status 2005, no chapter opened. Bosnia and Herzegovina, not even a candidate. And of course, Kosovo, no candidate, no visa-free travel, and no Council of Europe membership. This is because of EU internal politics, as you all know. It is also because it's been very easy to veto. And although Viktor Orban hasn't yet vetoed enlargement processes, we all know it's enough for one country to step in and extract concessions. But the biggest issue is the serious doubts in EU capitals. And I would like to focus on 2, Paris and Berlin. The view in Paris, expressed for many years now very articulatedly, and it's a reasonable view that many Europeans, West Europeans in particular, share, is that new members can only be accepted in a very different European Union. Now, let me just show you some of the statements that have been very clearly expressing this view that we need to address. So in April 2018, President Macron says he does not want a Europe that would gallop off to be 30 or 32 members tomorrow. Now, that's very different from the vision of the European Parliament. In May 2018, he said that enlargement has always weakened Europe every time. Again, that's not the vision I think many of us in this group would have. In June 2020, after the historic decision on candidate status, he described the Balkan countries as countries that as they are concerned, which means they believe that the train has already left the station. In reality, he sees them as people with a ticket in their hand on the platform, not on the train. It's an extraordinarily clear description of how he sees the enlargement process of the Balkans. So in his view, they are not even on the train yet. He also said that when we talk about our neighborhood and want to stabilize it, we shouldn't always say enter the house. People can stay in a different house than ours. He said that geopolitical response requires offering membership prospect, not membership. And he said that in the long run, does he think this is the right prospect to offer? Let me tell you frankly, and like what I said 3 years ago, so he's been consistent, no, because it will take time, a very long road to travel. Now, how about Berlin? The rhetoric from Berlin is radically different. We've heard Chancellor Scholz just in October talk about the EU 36 vision. The EU is better in a world of 10 billion people with 36 members. He also talked about this should happen as quickly as possible. But if you listen closer, and if you look at German policy on the Western Balkans, you see that in reality, it is still an incredibly slow process. As Olaf Scholz explained in Prague in his visionary speech on enlargement, of course, countries first have to fulfill the criteria. Well, that's obvious. But also the EU must make itself fit first. And this will take time. Now, we might agree that the EU needs to make itself fit, but the problem is this is not up to the Balkans or indeed to Ukraine. If there's no agreement on these reforms, enlargement might take another 10, 20, or 30 years. It will take time, that is clear. But should it be as little or as much as possible? So what is the reality of the process today? The problem is that here we have a gap between rhetoric and reality. When Ursula von der Leyen traveled to Serbia recently, she said Serbia is well advanced. Well, that's the kind of rhetoric Balkan leaders have heard for a while. Reality, however, is that when the Commission published its report this autumn on the rule of law, Serbia was behind Montenegro, Albania, and North Macedonia. So the country is negotiating for 10 years, or 8 years in this case, making no progress on the rule of law. Of course, Bosnia, Kosovo, Turkey far behind. The mechanics of this process do not work. We know that the Commission assesses regularly the progress in the chapters and in the fundamentals. It already does it with a 5-point scale, well advanced, good, moderate, some level of preparation, or early stage, the earliest. Red is bad. Now look at Montenegro and you see that there is some green here. This is progress in all the chapters over 5 years, but almost no movement, and no movement in the last year. Look at Serbia. Again, less green, no movement for years. These two countries are negotiating. Look at North Macedonia, which has had a reform government, but there is no progress. Nothing's changing. on the chapters, which is, as Olaf Scholz says, the precondition for accession. Look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, completely stuck, it's all red. Now, Serbia has opened a number of chapters, but open chapters no more progress than closed chapters. So this process doesn't make sense. You're not advancing, you're not getting better. Even those which have reform governments do not seem to make progress. Why is that? Because they are all put in a hamster wheel with no goal in sight. It's not clear whether on their own effort, if they work hard, they can reach a goal that is attractive to their societies. So how to turn this around? Well, let's look back to the founders. And this is a very simple and I think a very compelling story of something that has been done before many times in EU history. Focus on breakthroughs, be very focused, and link it to economic interests. That's how Europe advanced. The European Economic Community, first coal and steel, then the single market, was built around the self-reinforcing effect of economic integration that creates interests in France, in Germany, in other countries that Ukraine should become a full member. So how do we create as strong an interest, economically as well as politically, that there is a lobby for membership emerging in the next few years? Well, the first step is to make the strict Commission assessments. And as we've seen, they are strict. They are not cheap. They are not easy to gain. The Commission is very difficult in seeing progress, and that's how it should be. But these strict assessments should be linked to a goal. If you make progress there, you should reach something meaningful. Now imagine Ukraine, and that's the aim, to have a good level of preparation in all the chapters as soon as possible, in 3, 4, 5 years. 5 years is what it took Croatia. If Ukraine reaches that, what would be the meaningful goal that would mobilize and focus the effort? Well, what do we define happens when a country meets these conditions? At the moment, we can't say it will be a full member because, as we've just heard from the French president and many others, the EU needs to make itself fit first. And we don't know how long this will take, which seems profoundly unfair and could be very demotivating. So the second breakthrough, the first one is focus on the assessments by the Commission as the key tool to measure progress. It doesn't matter how many chapters you have opened, as we have seen. It matters what the Commission says you have done. Second, make getting into the single market and the 4 freedoms, means the 4 freedoms, goods, services, people, and capital, being inside the EU's integrated structures, dependent on the Commission assessment. So if Ukraine meets a good preparation, which in the past has been enough to close a chapter, if it has a good preparation in the eyes of the Commission in every one of the chapters, it should then automatically receive single market access and the 4 freedoms. And Sweden, with its presidency and the experience of its own way of joining the EU, which was in this way, first joining the single market, then joining the EU as a full member. This is how Sweden, Finland, Austria moved to membership. Sweden should put in a council conclusion next year that yes, the talks should start for full membership, and on the road to full membership, once the Commission says that any country, in this case Ukraine, meets the criteria fully of good preparation, it should then no longer have to wait for EU reform, but should have immediate access to the single market. It's no new process, it's no detour, and it's a credible goal that depends on Ukraine. And this is what Jacques Delors, a Frenchman, a French Commission president, proposed in 1990 for European democracies like Sweden, Austria, and Finland. This was the Finnish and Norwegian road to EU accession. It's been done before. It's not a new complicated structure that nobody's ever tried out and that people will look at with skepticism. And people in the Swedish administration, like the State Secretary for European Integration, Christian Danielsson, have been involved in this in their early years when Sweden joined the European Economic Area. The Treaty of Rome developed this vision. The Treaty of Rome said that Europe is about eliminating barriers. And Jean Monnet realized that once you are full in the single market, there will be so many economic mechanisms that will tie us together, that then the political interest in staying together will grow as well. So Ukraine in this way would create and strengthen its own lobby in Europe that has an interest not just ideological, but material, economic, in Ukraine moving ever, ever closer. The single market vision and realities, of course, this debate has already started. Ursula von der Leyen on 14th of September said, the Commission will work with Ukraine to ensure seamless access. Now, that is very close to what we have in mind. And this opens a door for Sweden and the Commission together in the next presidency to define what that means. The single market is Europe's biggest, greatest success story, von der Leyen said. Now it's time to make it a success story for our Ukrainian friends. A brilliant and visionary statement. And in response, 2 days later, President Zelensky said, we discussed that we want to join the EU single market on the path towards full EU membership. This is exactly the vision. But now it needs to be operationalized. It needs to be seized and made concrete. In the draft conclusion for the Council meeting in December, this is what we have been shared. Of course, as you know, it's still not agreed. Countries will negotiate. But this is what's in it now. The Council invites the Commission to prepare a roadmap outlining next steps to deepen sectoral cooperation, including the integration of Ukraine into the EU single market. I think this would be a very good step in December. And with the next presidency, clarify that once Ukraine, 2 more sentences, once Ukraine meets the criteria assessed by the Commission, it should then be integrated fully and enjoy the 4 freedoms. Just 1 more sentence to add to this, clarify it, and then start the talks. And suddenly Ukrainian reformers have a real goal that is reachable before them. Remember the Vilnius miracle. I didn't choose this because of Andrius KUBILIUS, but remember a time when, in terms of the per capita GDP, Lithuania stood at 37% of the EU being 100, Romania 26%. And just a few decades, less than 2 decades later, the convergence has been amazing, you know, both in Lithuania and in Romania. And this was because of the integration into the EU single market, because of the 4 freedoms, and because of the transformation in the institutions that was required to get there. Of course, it was also crucial to have EU support. So the goal should be that if countries like Ukraine are in the single market 5 years from now, that with the next budgetary period, there is already the kind of cohesion funding necessary that countries will need and have received in the past. This is in everyone's interest. In the interest of Moldova, which should be offered the same. In the interest of Ukraine, in the interest of the French, because it will not overburden EU decision-making structures, but create pressure on the necessary EU reforms. And in the interests of honest skeptics like the Dutch, which want countries to first prove that they meet the criteria. Well, in this case, it's purely meritocratic. This is what reformers in Ukraine and Moldova need. Opening talks, locking the commitment of merit-based full access. It is a few lines in the next Council conclusions, and it is then working out, and on this we have a paper soon, what this means for institutions. Ukraine should be as involved as Norway is. I don't believe, although I've seen Michael Emerson's proposals, but I don't believe it's realistic for the EU to give Ukraine or other countries more power to be in the institutions than Norway. But if it does, great. We're not against this. But at least Ukraine should be as much involved as Norway or Iceland are today. But the key is the economic integration, because this will create the interest that will make it irreversible, as we have seen in Europe's own history. So following this winter, what we need is a European spring. It's realistic. Let's discuss how we get there. And let's make the most of the opportunity with Sweden at this crucial moment being in the driving seat, bringing Germany and France on board. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Gerald. Really very inspiring presentation. I hope that you can share that presentation, yes. I don't know, in chat or whatever. You should send us, and really we should be very happy to share it to everybody around. And really, you know, again, I would remind, chat is working, so everybody can, you know, put their you know, questions. I would start very simply. if we are talking, okay, let's imagine that Swedish presidency will be successful, exactly according, along those lines which you spoke out. So, in your opinion, how long it would take for Ukraine to get, to the membership in single market, for integration into single market? What does it mean in the calendar? How long it was done by other countries. How long it can take for Ukraine?
Well, of course, no country has emerged from what Ukraine is suffering at the moment, the destruction of its infrastructure in this way. And we don't know how long this will go on. But when it comes to institutional resilience, when it comes to the preparation of institutions, the focus of the administration, the motivation of the civil service, there are not that many countries who would match Ukraine today. So if we go by historical precedent, the start of negotiations to the end of negotiations, the fastest were countries like Slovakia, where it took, I think, 36 months. The longest was Croatia, where it took 5.5 years. And countries that were successful. I'm not counting those who don't join, which are still negotiating. So if there is the kind of EU support, if there is the financial support for the Ukrainian state to avoid hyperinflation and the military support so that it can prevail in this war as soon as possible, I don't see why Ukraine should take longer than Croatia. And that would mean if you start accession talks now, we are in 2022, by the next budget period, when the EU will make its next multi-annual budget, Ukraine, the planning should be that Ukraine would be part of the single market already. Then, of course, we will see the politics when this leads to the full membership, hopefully soon after. In the case of Finland and Austria, it took 1 year. But this depends on the politics, on the institutions. We don't know. But if Ukraine is then in the single market, then also the logic of cohesion kicks in. Then it will be in a position to absorb funding. And it will be this signal that in addition to funding from donors, and in addition to hopefully reconstruction soon with the Russian foreign currency assets, which should be seized, in addition to this, it will be the private sector that will drive reconstruction. And the argument I'm using in Germany in every debate on this is to remind the Germans that today Germany exports more to the Czech Republic and to Poland than to China. And the potential of a Ukraine that is part of the single market, where investors have confidence, where institutions are reformed, with its big population, the potential of Ukraine to become another, if you want, China in this respect for German exports and others in the EU is very real. So this could happen. The time horizon, it should happen by 2027 as a realistic goal, perhaps faster, but I mean, we are not looking in the crystal ball.
Yeah. Okay, good. And another question, which when you described really in a very realistic way, Paris and Berlin position, I started to consider that there is a very simple difference. I don't know if I am correct, but on those two issues, reforms of EU institutions and enlargement. So for me, it looks like that Berlin is taking quite a realistic approach that reforms of EU institutions is needed for enlargement to happen. When in Paris, I see some arguments, where priorities for reforms and enlargement, since, for example, we are very much supportive for enlargement. Enlargement talks are used in order to convince everybody to go for reforms of institutions. So how do you see really if to overcome, some kind of this, I don't know, still, some political skepticism about enlargement and so on, especially in Paris, what do you expect from, big capitals? Are they ready to agree with the lines which you proposed, or still, enlargement is some kind of, how to say, something what the big capitals are very much afraid of, especially in Paris. I don't know why, but it looks like that they're afraid,
Well, I think I think having lived for quite a while in France and having followed the French debate a lot, and always being very aware that a lot of, the structures we have, the success of the European integration since the 50s has been very much based on French ideas, including, of course, Jean Monnet's and Schumann's idea that economic interests create a self-reinforcing positive cycle, which I think is often underestimated. So when we talk about integration into the single market, it's not just crucial for Ukraine to attract the investment to rebuild. It's also crucial because it creates material interests in big economies in the rest of Europe in wanting this process to accelerate, because then there is an interest in making it irreversible. Now, in addition to this, I think the French position that enlargement can promote reform is also true. But the only thing I would add is that for this, enlargement must be credible. So in our proposal, which is very similar to what Jacques Delors proposed to Austria and Finland and Sweden and Norway in 1990, because at that time, the feeling was the EU of 12 shouldn't enlarge too soon. It first needed to get its house in order with the Maastricht Treaty and with the steps towards the single currency. And at that time, actually, Jacques Delors proposed something that wasn't a detour, but that kept the door to enlargement open. And of course, in the end, that's how it worked. But having countries close to accession increases the pressure for reform. So imagine if in 2025, 2026, Ukraine has achieved the conditions to join the single market, and it has received the guarantee now, 2023, that then it will actually be able to enjoy the four freedoms. And other countries are close or at the same level, front runners in the Western Balkans or even Moldova. At that moment, full accession is a realistic option because the countries would be ready. And then those who argue that this requires reform have a very much different sense of urgency behind the process. You can then say to those who are skeptical about reform, listen, if we want to complete enlargement, we need to do reforms, which France and Germany and others really think are vital. I think it is reinforcing. It's not a contradiction.
I see. Okay. I see now, I will ask Katya maybe to bring Bernard Guetta we shall allow him to ask his question, visually. Bernard is member of European Parliament, very good friend of us from Paris, from France. So Bernard, if you are able to...
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we
yes,
hear
okay,
you.
Very good. So I was very interested by this vision. Thank you very much. But one question, don't you think that the length, in the case of Ukraine, that the length of the accession process will depend mainly of the military situation on the battlefield? Can you imagine Ukraine entering the single market with the war going on? Maybe yes, I don't know. But this is a real question and certainly a real difficulty.
Yes. Well, let me answer this question in two ways. First, of course, at the moment when the lights go out in Kiev and it's not clear if there will be water or heating in many cities in Ukraine, and the Russian terror attacks are making basic life for ordinary people impossible. This is not really a moment in which an administration can focus on the kind of detailed reforms that are necessary. But my assumption, and this is, I think, the assumption of many of us here, is that in itself, we must do everything to help Ukraine bring this war to an end as soon as possible. But what if Ukraine manages to retake more territory, the Russian conquest is pushed back, but the war is still not completely finished? What if in some parts of the country that Ukraine wants to take back and there is no agreement on a ceasefire, on peace, Ukraine has more control. There is again a sense of normality, as we've seen in recent months, in at least the west of the country and in the center of the country. Should then be the end of the war, which would give Russia a veto, be a precondition before we let Ukraine into the single market? And my answer is no. Look at two examples from European history. The first one is Ireland and the United Kingdom. The war in Northern Ireland had the deadliest year, 1972, which was just when Ireland and the United Kingdom joined the European Union. And it was, of course, a conflict that went on for 2 more decades until 1998. The reason it in the end became solvable in 1998 was because Ireland and the United Kingdom were inside the EU. So it was actually a right decision not to tell Ireland and Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, you first have to solve this before we let you in. It would have been a mistake. But the second example is even closer to your experience, and I've thought about this a lot when I was living in Paris. It's that the single market negotiations in 1957 took place at the same time as the Battle of Algiers. So the greatest success in European integration, this great breakthrough, this vision of a Europe with no barriers, that is the Treaty of Rome, took place at the time when one of the 6 countries was engaged in a bitter war. And imagine if then people would have said, listen, we can't advance. The Fourth Republic has too many other problems. There is a war. Let's postpone this European integration vision for after the end of the Algerian War, which of course only came in 1962. This would have been another terrible mistake from the point of view of building a credible Western Europe. You know, when the Fourth Republic collapsed, when the French Empire ended in Algeria, the Treaty of Rome and what it built, the European Economic Community, continued to thrive. And I think this is why I say it's not unusual at all for European integration to make progress at times of war or conflict.
If I may, I would discuss this assertion. Why? Very simply, because in any case, the United Kingdom wasn't the Soviet Union in the case of the Irish War. And in any case, the Front National de Libération Algérien wasn't neither the Soviet Union. And so the comparison with those two situations doesn't seem to me so, I'm sorry to say so, but so relevant. But I understand your point about the possible Russian veto, about ending the war before starting or ending the negotiation about the enlargement of the single market. That I understand, that I share that. The two comparisons, no. I'm sorry. One more question, if I may. Andrius, may I? One more question?
Please,
okay.
Go on.
What do you think, if you think something about it, about the idea, Macron's idea of the, what is it in English, European political community?
Well, at the moment, we have, we now would have 4 structures at this moment to try to create an order on the European continent. We have the OSCE, which is a very weak structure which is not even an organization and which requires consensus. So we've seen the OSCE enter into a real period of trouble, right? So the OSCE with all these Central Asian members and Belarus and Russia, of course, is not going to give us a structure for order. We have the Council of Europe, which I think we shouldn't forget. Ukraine is a member, Russia is out now. This is a club of almost only democracies, and it's crucial when it comes to human rights. It's the oldest institution, and there is this vision of defending Europe based on the European Convention on Human Rights. I almost wondered why the European political community was not just simply attached to the Council of Europe. We could have just done this. It's almost a complete overlap. But fine, the Council of Europe focuses on human rights. Then we have the European political community, which has no secretariat, which is as far as I understand, it's basically about summits between leaders. And it's fantastic that the next summit is in Chisinau. You know, I think this is the best way to use this new structure. It sends a strong signal. I was just in Chisinau, and I know they have difficulties finding the right place for such a gathering of leaders. But it's a great honor and it's a great signal to Moldova. But it can never replace either the Council of Europe with the court and the Venice Commission and the Committee for Prevention of Torture and all the institutions that exist, which play a big role, nor can it replace the accession process, which is about the fundamental grand idea of post-war Europe, that democracies that are sovereign through cooperation and sharing institutions can remove all the barriers between them, and then with more and more common interests, define common policies internally and to the outside.
Don't try to convince me, I'm convinced on that. And but the European political community could be also a first step in the accession process, not only of Ukraine, but the new candidate states. And because the full membership, even for Ukraine, it's wishable, but extremely difficult. And this is why I'm so seduced by your idea of the single market and the full liberties of freedom. But we could maybe, this is a question to me also, and not only to you or to Andrius, but we could use the Macron's idea of the Communauté Politique Européenne as a first chamber or a first step of the accession process. Don't you think so?
But yeah, Bernard, and I would add maybe a little bit opposite, question to Gerald immediately, because yeah, political community is interesting development. Not very clear what it will bring, but I would try to avoid any kind of possibility to have political community as something an alternative to enlargement. Because I agree absolutely with what Gerald have said, maybe good or bad comparisons, I don't know. But when I'm looking to, recent situation, why Putin decided to start the war against Ukraine, I am coming maybe to some paradoxical conclusion. I think that the biggest danger for Putin is exactly through the process of enlargement to have in the neighborhood very successful Ukraine, because that would be an inspiration for ordinary Russian people, and that could, to follow the same track, to go with democracy and modernization of economy, and that could bring really big troubles for such a regime as Putin has. Mm-hmm. So in some way, we need to understand, and I don't know if maybe Gerald can elaborate a little bit, I always was hopeful that in Paris they will take that geopolitical understanding, that enlargement of EU towards Ukraine can bring a lot of also changes to Russia itself, inspiring people to go for transformation and so on, and that is why Putin is so heavily trying to destabilize Ukraine, to start the war, not to allow it to become a successful country. So the question is, do we in Europe, have, clear geopolitical strategy or still not, That is what Borrell have said recently, that unfortunately Europe was so heavily dependent on Russian gas that we have no policy towards Russia and no policy towards Ukraine. I see those policies very much interconnected. And that is why we need to move. And I see exactly enlargement towards, EU enlargement as a very important step forward. And political community, it's nice, but I do not understand what it can bring. So, Gerald, can you elaborate? And then we shall have another question on chat.
Well, I think and I very much think this is a debate that we need to take to France, and I'm ready to, I mean, also do it in French and with French politicians, French intellectuals, French thinkers on Europe, because clearly Europe has always been built with France. I mean, and anybody who lives in Paris and knows the history of the European Union knows that. But a lot of these ideas that I propose, I really inspired by studying, the thinking of the founders of Europe, which said, there were all these grand visions of political communities, defense communities, unions in the late 40s, in the early 50s. But in the end, it was Monnet who said we need concrete interests. Interests plus institutions. So not just trade, never that, but interests plus institutions, but they must be supported by interests. And it was not an accident that out of the single market, out of this vision of removing barriers, grew something that has been so strong that it's made any conflict unthinkable among members. It's not just that it's not realistic, it's just unthinkable. And it's been so strong that everybody wants to join. All the periphery, everybody would like to be part of it. And that's because there's incredible vision of interests. And I think that's often missing in these reflections. Now, obviously, the interest of Europe would be, as Andrius has hinted, with Ukraine, Europe would be stronger. Militarily, Ukraine is making Europe safer every day that it is holding off the Russian army, is making an attack on others in Europe less likely. I mean, the Moldovans are telling me in Moldova that their security guarantee is the Ukrainian army at the moment. That's what they rely on. Ukraine would make Europe more prosperous. It's a big market. We've discovered how crucial it is to global markets, from agriculture to energy. And it would be good to be part of this community of open economies linked together. And ideologically, this is a country that has fought under the European flag 2 revolutions and now a bitter war, from 2004 and 2014, the Euromaidan. And where the first reaction of the government and the president to an invasion was to apply for EU membership. If you look for a better signal to the world that Europe has created something that is really hard to understand by Putin. He doesn't understand this interest-based union through law of sovereign state. He thinks there must be an empire somewhere. There must be a central control that forces all Europeans to be together, and it's either America or who knows, Germany. Or he can't understand that it's just such an ingenious construction that Ireland has the same interest in remaining in it as Germany or Portugal or Greece. And Ukraine recognizing this and saying that for us to have a different future to our past, where war becomes unthinkable, we need to be part of a defense alliance, in some way have these guarantees that we will not be attacked. But for a prosperous life and a stable democratic development, we need to be in the EU. And that's the wisdom of a French idea. I mean, yes, Germany supported it from the start. There were great Belgian statesmen like Paul-Henri Spaak and others who developed this. The Dutch supported it with their pragmatism. But in the end, it's this grand vision that we need to protect. And that means not doing what I see happening now, which I fear is a temptation. That some in Europe will say, we first need to sort out our own problems, and we don't know how. So let's slow down Ukraine in the way we slow down the Balkans. Let's tell the Commission, please don't assess too early. Let's tell the Ukrainians, and some are doing it, don't be too quick, without realizing that the belief in the transformative power is what motivates civil servants of high caliber who could work anywhere in the world for 10 times more money to be in Ukraine and take their country to a goal. If they believe that this will take 20 years or 10 years, like for Montenegro, and then they will still not be anywhere, many of these people will give up on the dream. So it's important to encourage this for the reforms. And I think we need to take this debate particularly to countries that have the most doubt, France, the Netherlands, and the questions that are raised in Paris and The Hague are the right ones. Will this make Europe stronger or weaker? but I think we can say it will make Europe stronger.
Good, Gerald. And one maybe last question from Günther Fellinger from Austria, from Pro-NATO Enlargement Group. And he is asking, I don't know if you see about the euro as a currency for Ukraine, or at least, pegging the currency to euro as we did, with the Baltics. So what's your opinion about that? How important that should be?
Well, I think it's an interesting idea, but at the time of Ukraine's economy being targeted, the economy contracting, hyperinflation, it's difficult, I think, to have the kind of assessments of what is economically beneficial also for Ukraine. So we will have to await the end of the war. I mean, it's clear that for smaller countries like Kosovo or Montenegro, the benefits of their own currency have not been very big. I'm not sure. I'm not the economist. I'm not the expert on monetary policy. What is in the best interest of Ukraine?
Yeah. Sorry, I do not hear anymore. Where is Gerald?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, you are here. Okay, good. So simply changed. So,
and I will send you the presentation. It's a bit big, but I will turn it into PDF and I will send you. You can share with all participants. If I don't know if you can reach everyone, if they or you can write. Sorry, I will put my email in the chat. So if you want to get the presentation or discuss any more questions or get future reports.
Okay.
You can write to me and I'll send it to you.
Well, I don't know, something was likely to happen, but nevertheless, your presentation really very was this solo, talk. Always, very thank everybody, to go. We are planning a Ukraine delegation to Stockholm about how much of hopes we are seeing, for this ahead. And I hope that really what started to happen during this war is, is about to be this, geopolitical move on, to give candidates be continued with negotiation as soon as possible, and the single market, and of course to full end, and that will change incredibly the whole picture of European continent. Striving for. Again, thanks a lot who participated and in touch, and let's have also to talk about both for Ukraine and for the whole European Union.